So in one event, I managed to qualify on 7 cylinders, had our first top 32 battle, and I had the hardest crash of my career. And if you haven't seen the Finland recap that Jack put together, go ahead and check out this video below. It was a really good overview of everything and all the exciting highs and lows. But this is a review on that particular event and everything that went down. So going into Finland, we had a blown steering rack from Ireland. At Ireland, we swapped the steering racks, and I only managed to drive the car up and around the track and back after the event was over. I felt that the car was steering better than it actually ever has before. The steering racks that we had for this particular car were from a friend, and they were probably sitting outside for a certain amount of time, and initially putting them in, everything felt totally fine, but then they quickly declined in their performance. The only reason I never swapped it at the event in Ireland was because I've swapped them before and had issues with bleeding the system and having air pockets. Moral of the story, when you think of something, especially when you think of it more than once, so 2 or more times, you should just do it. That's something that it's due diligence, and that's what I had done when I was building roll cages in the past. If you made a tube that didn't fit perfectly and you thought about remaking that tube more than once, the rule is if you think about it twice, you have to remake the tube, because you're building the entire rest of the cage off of something that you weren't initially happy with, and it'll chain react and make the whole thing bad. So basically, applying that to everything in your life and to this, if you think of it, you should just do it. We did think of it and we didn't do it. So that is going to be a lesson learned in that, where I will never make that mistake again. The car felt great going into Finland. So when we arrived, first practice, Friday morning, it's dry. The car is working amazing. I had the track figured out in 2 laps. So the first one was get around the track, figure out your initiation point and speed. The second lap, we were already focusing on certain aspects, and because we are used to driving bank tracks here in Canada and the US, I was probably one of the few drivers that absolutely nailed the last section on the first lap. Up and tight to the wall, nice and wide, flooring it into the bank, understanding that I can go very quickly because the bank will hold you. The only issue I was actually struggling with in practice was the inner zone 3 to outer zone 4. I was just a little too tight on the rumble strip that they had laid out, and then the judges talked to me and told me you can be tighter to the clip, which I actually didn't know. They usually set up a cone and then they have lines on the track. The lines of the track are for your tire, and the cone is simply nothing more than a reference point. So he said, put your bumper on that cone and then you'll be wider getting to zone 4 earlier and you'll have a perfect run. They were really impressed with the runs. I don't say this just to pump myself up or anything, but the judges and the other driver spotters and other drivers are walking to our pit and complimenting how well we're doing with the track and how fast we can figure things out. So honestly, it was really promising going into this event. I think without the crash, it would have been almost too good to be true. Like, everything was going really well. So the weather is really inconsistent and we have qualifying in 30 minutes. How am I feeling? Pretty good. The car is good. I'm good. We just have to work around the weather, and that's all we got to do. So I need to drive. The car has no problems. So if I mess up, it's totally on me. Going into qualifying, after some pretty decent practice in the wet and in the dry, we had done a wet setup, which essentially, because of how inconsistent the weather was, we just aired up the tires for the rain. And going into the first round of qualifying, it was wet but not raining, but then it was raining for other people. It was very inconsistent. So The first run I did, which was a 62-point run, was pretty good. We were one of the first drivers to actually patch a lap together. And the only weird thing with qualifying, which a lot of drivers had issues with, was that for some reason we were starting in the chase lane, which unfortunately I didn't realize until I went up to the line. And you know, you're thinking about everything else on the track. You're not really realizing that you starting 8 feet over is going to probably change something, especially on your run-up style. So I was about 8 feet 2 inside on outer zone 1. Coincidentally, the exact same amount of space where you start in the chase lane. So that was too bad because I was thinking about everything else on the track and I was nailing outer zone 1 no problem. So in my first run, my biggest mistake was being 2 inside on outer zone 1, and I kind of blame that on starting in the chase lane. And yes, I could have easily adapted, but I was thinking about other aspects of the track, and honestly not spinning and hitting the wall was the main priority of like what the drivers were doing prior to me. Plus there was 2 or 3 crashes right before me. After the first run, the 62, I had myself in a pretty high position after all the drivers had went because it was full wet. I don't know, it was like 7th or 10th or something. Like it was kind of up there with that score. 15 plus people had zeros, including like James Dean and other guys that are like, they don't make mistakes and they are the best. They set the bar. If you want to determine anything on the track, they're always going to be what the bar is. So going into the second run, we started seeing the weather changing. So the track was wet, the rain was gone, and drying quickly. So moving through the first 10 guys, I felt pretty good. I saw that the runs were getting more and more consistent. The track was fairly dry. So I waited up until I saw, I forget who I was watching for. It might have been Ryuse or something on the screen. But at that point, I know I need to start the car and go to the line. As soon as I start the car, it's only running on 7 cylinders. It was perfect in the pits, then leaving. So needless to say, I did my second run on 7 cylinders. Was missing my glove because it was in the engine bay from when I was checking connections. It was kind of a disaster. I didn't plug my headset in. I wasn't able to talk to Chris. I basically just sent it. I knew I needed to be wide in zone 1, so I came way further over. Flicked it in. Zone 1 was perfect. Zone 2 was perfect. The announcers were like, wondering how I was able to hold on to that angle. And honestly, if the rear didn't boop the wall, I would have stayed in zone 2, and that could have been like a high 80s, low 90s score with 7 cylinders. If you listen carefully, you'll hear how awful the car sounds. Without the nitrous, I actually would not have been able to complete that lap. The nitrous really carried it through, which is not good. It's not a good thing to run. What happens when you have a cylinder down is the lambda sensor picks up on the 3 instead of the 4, and you're actually going into a super rich state where that O2 sensor is going to add fuel to compensate, and now you're not only down a cylinder, you're super rich on this bank, meaning you're way down on power. And super rich is safer, much safer, but it's also way less horsepower. So it was only for 30 seconds, whatever that run was, but we made it into the show. We were 31st with a 79.5, and if we got a 79, we would have been 34th or 35th. So those 0.5, every point matters in this series with 55 drivers, all of them being at a very elite level. Yeah, so after diagnosing the entire engine, we pulled every plug, every wire, checked every injector, we compression tested the engine, we did everything. Honestly, we didn't find the problem. We put new plugs in and then we put all the wires back on, the same wires, and then it worked. Maybe it was a bad plug itself. It's very unlikely, but all the plugs looked fine. Even the EGTs were showing pretty much the same range of temperature, but at idle, cylinder 3 was showing much lower than everything else, only at idle. We changed the plugs in and essentially that fixed it. Now, we never found the root cause and the car was fixed by the next day, which isn't a good thing. You kind of want to find out what the issue was. Needless to say, thanks to Ziad and Lloyd and everyone else helping, we got it fixed. Friday night, everyone was really happy. We're in the show, although near the end of the pack, that's fine. When you qualify in Drift Masters, it doesn't really matter where you land. There are incredible drivers that are qualifying in the top and in the bottom. It does not determine how good that driver is in battle, and to be fair, they're all good in battle. And one example is Piotr, one of the best drivers there, didn't qualify at all. So Saturday morning, we're feeling like really, really good. We had a good night's sleep. We got to sleep in about an extra hour because practice started a little later. So we're fresh. We made an Ackerman change in the morning. We got in line for practice, and what happened was practice battling on Saturday morning means you need to prepare yourself for the show. We didn't really have any good chase practice, so we're going into this giving it 100% in the chase, leaving nothing on the table. So that's exactly what I did. And in my practice run, the lead driver, he came over to my pit after and apologized because he was in the wrong gear. He was in fourth instead of third. With the sequential transmissions, I know a lot of those guys are running between gears, whereas with a dog box like mine, you do want to pick a gear, especially on this track, and just kind of stick to it, because those transitions, there's not much time to change, but with a sequential, you can kind of do that pretty quick. He was in the wrong gear, so when he went to light off, he didn't go anywhere. Huge delay, no acceleration through the zone, no smoke from his car, no nothing, and I was just on the handbrake, on the foot brake. You could see my front tire dragging and the rear tire dragging. The car was fully in a stop and he just was not going. So basically what happened was this wheel hit the back of his car and it just pointed the wheels straight for a second, and then you can see that the wall is 20 feet away and you really have no opportunity to correct that. On most other tracks, you might have counter-steered, fixed it, gone a little off, like let's say Mandela, for example. If I hit someone on initiation and you straighten out a bit, you're just gonna reinitiate, but you'll be wide and you'll be back, but it's not gonna be a problem. You're not gonna run into a concrete barrier. So when we hit that wall, a lot of the Drift Masters guys were just getting there because it was the first practice. They were right at the wall watching, and we moved this 1-ton block like a couple feet forward, and it was the worst crash I've ever had because the seatbelt, like I actually felt the pain from the seatbelt catching my body, which I've never had that before. I know for a fact that everything within the car, like my element stick and where I put my phone, and everything was just gone in the front of the car. Components in the engine bay, the engine itself, and then the frame rail got pushed back. So the damage on the chassis is like extreme. We were able to back up and drive away, which everyone was super impressed by, but the ride height was 2 inches lower on that side. The frame rail is buckled 2 inches back, 2 inches up, 2 inches inward, and it pushed the engine over as well into the other frame rail, and the other frame rail is slightly off. So we have the two rear tires and the two front tires are no longer in line with each other. They're kind of offset like this, and it drove awful. We didn't have time to set anything up, and we were basically compensating with the suspension to adjust away from the frame to get our camber a little better. We had about -10 degrees on the one wheel when we were lined up, and we didn't have time to space it out and make it, you know, a reasonable amount. And then in the burnout box, it was turning fine to the right, but turning to the left, it would just spin the car out. Going into the battle, we were less than 50%. The engine was working. That was one positive. The engine was sounding and working great. The car looked bad, it drove bad, and I was nowhere near 100%. And that was really my first chase of the event, was the one that you guys saw. So it was definitely not my best chase. I would have had lots of corrections to make if it was in a practice, but we patched it together and tried to make something of it.
Right, and the chassis rail on Josiah's Corvette is bent. He says the car doesn't drive right. One side is 2 inches lower than the other. Can he hold it together? He's left some ground. As you are, boy, Talasco now fires away, but Josiah makes himself back into the battle. You can see that car is so hard to drive, but he still makes a brave dive through the smoke, looks for the rear wheel, and that car looks like an...
And then, of course, it rained halfway through the battle, exactly dry and then soaking wet.
Next. Well, there we go, they're going to try it, and they flick it across the circuit, and there we go. In a heartbeat, it goes full wet. Josiah hits the tyre.
And the issue with that track was when it was soaking wet, it was kind of like we had it all figured out because we drove on it soaking wet, but I thought because it had only been raining for 30 seconds that we were in a half and half scenario. So when I entered into the corner, going pretty fast and throwing a lot of angle, I thought that it wouldn't have been a full wet track like it was on practices before. I was wrong, it was full wet.
Circuit, there we go, in a heartbeat, it goes full wet. Josiah hits the tyres, hits the wall, buries it, puts it into a big spin and hits the other side on the wall.
And I was the first driver to have that experience in the rain, so it really sucked to end that way. Not really much else I can say on that. So right now we're working with Edgar. He drives the Kebab Factory F22. Super nice guy. Like the one thing about Drift Masters that's amazing is the people. The people make it. Like these guys are amazing. We had to unload the car on the Monday that the truck arrived in Riga, or else it would have been stuck in the compound that the trucks are at until the event. Edgar met the truck in Riga, pulled my car out of the truck, put it on a trailer, brought it to his shop. And then Edgar's been calling other shops as well, basically arranging a frame shop to help with pulling the engine and then squaring up the chassis. It's been amazing, like meeting these guys, and I think that I'm in debt to a lot of people, and I will be there ready to offer any favors required when the time comes for these guys, and I would have no problem helping them out. Being in Europe is super difficult, and without these guys, nearly impossible, and they're all willing to help. So right now, the car is going to be straightened sometime this week, then it'll be left in the shop. I will have to go early and put the engine back in, probably weld some braces and some patches in some areas. I'm thinking about adding a tube from the cage to the frame rail there to brace that weak point. I'll probably fly in like 3 to 4 days earlier than I would have been, so maybe a week before the event, give myself some time to do that, because luckily in Riga on the Thursday we have 4 hours of additional practice, which you know I'm going to be doing. It's going to make a big difference for car setup going into Friday official practice and then ultimately the show on Saturday. If you guys are still watching this video, that means that you genuinely care about what's happening with the series, with me, with the shop, with the guys. I sincerely appreciate everything that you guys are doing for us. It's crazy that we have a viewership base and that we have this channel and that we're doing everything that we're doing, and the support from you guys is amazing. In Finland, I had, again, a ton of fans, just like in Spain and in Ireland, a lot of people that actually told me that I was either their favorite driver or their favorite car. The car got a little bit more than I did, but needless to say, it was still amazing to see that in a different country, that people recognize us and what we're doing and how we are different, and our driving style is on the more aggressive side of things, and I'm going to maintain that. It's a little bit harder. Like, this car isn't as easy to drive with the lightweight clutch and with the fast revs and with how much the suspension is working to move the car. But when it all works together, it's going to be that much more rewarding, and we just need some simple, I'm not going to say luck, because really luck has nothing to do with it. In racing, you are going to blow things up and you are going to break stuff. So you just have to be prepared and do your due diligence beforehand, that when an engine goes or when a rack goes, you are ready, able, and willing to swap it, and enough time to continue to compete, because everyone's dealing with stuff. There's no point in saying woe is me, because 18 to 20 guys kind of wrote their cars off this round. Not as bad as chassis like my car, but I saw them swapping subframes, changing suspension, braking wheels, all the same. So we made some improvements too. When I hit the wall in top 32, it actually smacked the wheel, broke the mounts on the steering rack, and the only reason I was able to drive back is because the steering rack was moving back and forth and hitting the subframe on each side. So going forward, I made a new double shear mount and a bracket that's going to further constrain the rack, so that if we take another hit like that, the rack's going to sustain it and not bust off those ears. Without a crash like that, we wouldn't have made this improvement, and it might have been an issue down the road. So all of these things add up to a better program and more success. So I'm currently in the new area where we have this Fastenal bin setup, where when I run out of something, I can actually take this bin and I can throw it up here, and there's a sensor that's going to pick up the bin and tell us that that bin is empty, and it's going to place an order for us automatically back to the headquarters at Fastenal. So these are going to be stocked up with the shelves that we have prior. They're going to spend less time coming in because they would come in on Tuesday and Thursday and then check the bins that are low and restock them that way. But this way we have full control. It's fully automated and it's going to clean up and speed up our reordering system, and we're not going to run out of hardware. So thank you guys at Fastenal. Curtis, I've been working with him for a long time. It's been great. It's just a local guy that runs the Fastenal depot here. All of these things, like as long as you continue to push the envelope and grow as a company, then you'll grow with people, and then the only way is up. We all work together to improve the product and to make, that's said too much already. That's the end of this video. See you guys in the next one.